Welcome to the 15th edition of the Jaipur Literature Festival, protected by Dettol Banega Swasth India at Han Michalski Foundation, Bethak. We are delighted to introduce My Country is Literature. The session is presented by Rajasthan Patrika. Indian author and former diplomat Navtej Sarna has written 9 books across genres, including novels, short stories, travel writing, literary essays, translations, and a large body of work on policy, literary, and cultural matters published in India and abroad. Chandrahas Choudhury is the author of Clouds and Days of My China Dragon. His collection of essays, the best of his literary criticism. My Country is Literature describes the book saturated years of his life as a young writer, the creation of literature by readers, and contains perceptive readings of diverse writers and books. Anindita Ghose's debut novel, The Illuminated, paints a world of relationship and women confronted by personal tragedies and the unfolding events of a dystopian political reality. In conversation with Meghna Pant, Meghna Pant is an award-winning author, screenwriter, journalist, and speaker who has been felicitated for a distinguished contribution to literature, gender issues, and journalism.
Thank you. Hello. Hi. So, very good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us here for this lovely session. I'm very excited to be moderating it today. And we are joined, of course, by prolific writers of nuanced Indian and global themes. So I'm really looking forward to this session. My Country is Literature. I'll be in conversation with the panelists for around 40 minutes, and then we'll throw it open to the floor. So if you have any questions, do keep them ready. So thanks, guys, for being here, and I'm looking forward to our session here. And let me start with Chandrahas, since this session has been inspired by the title of your book, My Country is Literature. So Chandrahas, what is the title meant to evoke? Explain to our audience here, what does it really mean?
Thank you, Meghna. It's lovely to see you all. Actually, in answer to your question, I would like to say if there's one place I can think of in the world where the title of my book doesn't need an explanation, it's JLF, because I think we're all here because our country is literature. And we love books, and that's what brings us together over here. So, however, I have to confess that 10 years ago, an event like this, sitting here speaking to actual faces, would have terrified me. So, you know, there are some things about your country being literature that make you very passive, inward-looking. Books are your real friends. You know, there must be so many of you who are readers who know that feeling. And I suppose that is a challenge that books have for you. Can you grow into them and learn something from them, and also go beyond them to engage with people based on what you have learned through reading? And in that way, I suppose I was very lucky. And in this book, I've tried to tell the story of those 2 decades of my life where in the beginning, all that I cared for was reading. And that's why I did English at university. And after I graduated from college, I was a cricket writer for 2 years. But I found going to work extremely stressful, particularly that, you know, you don't get an afternoon nap in the work world. And somewhere I thought, you know, this is very intellectually debilitating, and where is the world of books gone? Is this what adult life is all about? You know, you just do one thing all day long. And somewhere I craved that freedom, and that way, after a very short little detour in organized work life, I went back and I thought the only thing I know how to do is write about books at that time, although I wanted to become a novelist. And so for many years, I was a book critic of a newspaper that Anindita later edited, Mint Lounge. And it was wonderful work because it was like having a BA all over again, this time in the literature of your own country, and the syllabus is set week by week. You know, whatever used to come in, when you're a book reviewer, you don't have control over what you read. Whatever would come in, I would go to the office in Dadar once a week and look at the new books, and we would decide on one to review. And the others also I would take home, thinking one day, you know, you're getting them for free. Don't reject all these great books. Yeah. And sometimes I would read them on the train home. I've written about it in the opening essay. I'd be reading on the train home a work of fiction, biography, religion, Hinduism, whatever. And, you know, you have to make notes. It's work. You have to make notes of whatever you're thinking. And I would look up and I would see somebody sitting opposite me. And at the end of a day in Bombay, everybody was very tired. And sometimes our eyes would meet and they would say, competitive exams ke liye prepare kar rahe ho? And how could I explain that this is even bigger work than this? I'm trying to establish whether a book is really literature or not and give my reasons why. So not thinking that I couldn't do that, I would just say, like, yes, you're right.
But you know, your book has 60 essays about different writers, and I want to explore a little bit the relationship between literature and literary criticism, and all of you can, chime in, because, I mean, my new book, Boys Don't Cry, has come out, and I feel like book reviews, in a way, have become very pedestrian, and it's been a topic of contention for a lot of writers now. So tell me, is the book review still, you feel, a form of literary criticism, or has it changed form right now? And any of you, sir, Navtej sir can also answer, because his book, Second Thoughts, kind of addresses the same thing. So, yeah.
Do you want to start?
Sure. As a great partisan of the book review form, somebody who's written so many in his life, 400, 500, I agree. It is by nature a pedestrian form, but it is so because it has many disadvantages, Even to write a book, I can take 4 or 5 years, nobody's going to ask me. But the book review is always written to deadline. You don't necessarily have a choice about what you're reviewing. You don't know till you start reading it whether you're going to like it or not. And sometimes in 1 or 2 days, you have to articulate your opinion. And afterwards, a few days later, you find yourself thinking, actually, I shouldn't have said that. I have some other thoughts. You don't have the time to work out a coherent argument unless you have lots of practice. But even so, that is the space where the general reader, in the end, literature is nothing without the general reader. There can be many specialist readers. You read for your exams because you want to learn about a subject. But the reader who is interested in any kind of book, a newspaper and the book review is the place where the book meets the general reader. And so no matter if you find individual reviews that are good or not good, that can be a matter of opinion. But without a book review space in the public sphere, you end up having a lopsided world where books keep coming out, and you might also have felt it just disappears into a void. No one is speaking about it, not in a social media sense, but when someone, you'll all have known, you've written books. If you read a book review and feel someone has really seriously read your book, you feel so grateful for that attention. And in a way, that is what literary criticism is. It is a form of attention and a reverence for the spirit of literature. And then you can say, maybe this book is not exactly worthy of that, it is too loosely written. Even negative book reviews have a sort of politics and problems of their own. But in general, I would say, yes, the book review needs to be kept up.
I'll take that next, Meghna, because it might be hard for Chandrahas to kind of talk about what value he brought to, the book review space. I think there was a golden era of book reviewing. There were very good reviewers. There was Chandrahas, my former colleague Supriya Nair, Soma Ghoshal. I think reviewing books day in and day out, when that's a beat, when that's what you do, there's a merit to that, right? I feel it's kind of ad hoc now. There are excerpts which are easy and lazy, which seem to be the dominant way that books are covered. There are interviews ahead of a book release. And maybe some books randomly are reviewed. So you're not getting to gauge, one reviewer's perspective on the 10 releases that were key that year, because that reviewer was probably burdened with, so many other responsibilities. I think this is also a comment on the shrinking journalism space. But at the time when Chandrahas started reviewing, I mean, most of us read his blog even before he was published in the papers, the middle stage. So there were people, even Jai Arjun Singh, who were just reviewing because they wanted to review, and it was a weekly exercise, and I think there was some merit to it. As someone who had a first novel out last year, one thing that really perplexed me, and I, wonder if Chandrahas and Navtej would like to add to that, you've had, several books out, is I feel a lot of reviewers are responding to not the text, but to the politics of the book or the issues of the book. Every novel is now an issue novel, and the response is only to that. There's very little space to actually speak about, say, style or voice or form or structure, and I feel that's disappointing, yeah.
Well, let me come at it slightly differently. I'm not a professional book reviewer, but I think I've been reviewing books for about 40 years now. And a couple of things I can say. I think book reviews are extremely important. For the writer, very important. For the readers, they are a kind of, a kind of reasoned advertisement. It's not publicity, but it's reasoned advertisement that, okay, here is what so-and-so feels about a book, and here is what that journal or, feels it good enough or bad enough for it to be merited in its columns. The second thing is that in India, I have seen, largely, space has been shrinking for literary passages in newspapers and magazines. 40 years ago, every newspaper had a major Sunday supplement. And today you can hardly find a newspaper, even newspapers like The Hindu, which used to have enough space, are losing it. Yes, you do have certain specialized magazines like Biblio or Book Review and that. And the third thing is, I think as a writer, I found book reviews a very important stepping stone to your own creative writing. Because if you're a serious book reviewer, and if you have an exacting editor, I've reviewed books for the Times Literary Supplement and the FT supplements. They are so exacting, the editors, that, you cannot put in a word there which you don't believe in or you can't feel very strongly about. So in a way, if you're suddenly thrown a 600-page novel and asked to review it, and you have to produce a quality review, you are going to have to understand the art, the craft, the writer's other books. So I found it extremely educative process of doing serious book reviewing. I really do hope, I'm sure there's much space on the net, if not in the papers today, but I think all of us who have written books, what do you wait for after a book is published? Your sales are what they are and they'll come 6 months later, but the reviews will come next week. And that's what you see somebody, I've lived with this book for 10 years, what does the first reader think about it? So I think it's very important.
So then how does the role of the literary critic sort of evolve? Does this mean that every reader is now a literary critic? And then what possibilities are there for literary criticism in our country? Chandrahas?
Okay. It's a good question because, I guess in the audience there must be many of you who are lit students. You seem a very young crowd. Are there a few of you? A lot of you. And, I always think about degrees in literature as those 3 years when you spend not understanding what you have to do, and when you leave that you understand what you were supposed to be doing all that while. And learning how to construct an argument, because till I went to college, even I was what Oran Pamuk and even in this book, you call a naive reader. You read and then you say, I like this book, I didn't like this book. If someone asked you to explain a lot more, you might say three things to add to that, but not more than that. Yeah. And, but in a way, even when you hear a beautiful line of poetry and you say, wow, you are expressing a sort of aesthetic appreciation. And in that sense, every reader is a literary critic. You vote with your eyes, with your time. If you're bored by a book, you put it away. And then the higher literary criticism, and then there's no end to that road. Exposition can go on forever. You can find a page in one of the great books. You can have books and books of commentary on that. So that process is wonderful. And working out how to convey your passions and your feelings into a reasoned argument is the work of literary criticism. And without literary criticism, I firmly believe that literature can't survive. It's not that books won't get written, but without some sense of argument of what relationship books have to one another. When I go to people's houses, I like looking at the libraries. And it's amazing how every library has its own unique character. Even if somebody has 10 or 12 books, they won't be the exact 10 or 12 books, except in some very boring cases, Those are not the real readers, according to me. Those are the cut-paste libraries, But everybody has a particular order and of their library, and that is, in a way, they're voting again. These are the books I want to keep in front of me. When I recently left my little Delhi apartment after 9 years there, but I had about 3,000 books there. And coming home after traveling, it's such people used to ask, do you live alone? I said, no, I live with 3,000 people in a one-room apartment, because every one of them you have some relationship to them. And that way, to those of you young people, I would say, cultivate a library all your life and try and read one book a week for at least 10 years of your life. You know, it's 500 books, it's not a lot, there's thousands of books worth reading. At the end of that, if you give yourself that in your 20s, you'll find the rest of your life, you have abundant room to move in your mind between ideas, between thoughts, between people. You'll be giving yourself the best foundation. You know, we live in a very complex civilization. And just by living life, especially from what your parents tell you, you know, I can speak from personal experience. The world, of the representation of India that your family gives you is but a tiny grain of sand in the overall picture of the beach. So once you escape that, you need books to give yourself a sense of the Indian path, the depth of the Indian past, and the range of all the languages of Indian literature. You know, we are the most multilingual national literature in the entire world. You've got to read some writer from every region of India before you feel that you are a true Indian. So these are my few thoughts about what literary criticism can do to
evolve into.
Well, you know, literary critics are very important for writers to understand what they have written.
Absolutely.
For writers themselves. Yeah. Writers write. Literary critics define what you have written. When I write a book, I don't know what is it. Is it modern or postmodern or submodern? But then the critic will put it, make it respectable. You know, give it definitions, terms, footnotes, references. You know, literary critics, Chandrahas being one of the leading lights, actually makes writers feel important.
But Navtej, I'm going to beg to differ with you there. I think literary reviews and criticism are very important. We are here to discuss that, but not for writers. I think they're important for readers. That was one of the first bits of advice I got as a debut novelist of speaking to writers, including Franzen, who I interviewed for JLF Digital last week. And I think the first thing he told me is, I hope you're not reading your reviews. As a person with the first book out, of course, I would be lying if I said I wasn't. You know, my publicist is right here. If I wasn't like asking her, Shabnam, what do you think about this review? What's going on? Why does this person hate me? You know, you are kind of really moved or affected. But I don't think that's the way a writer can proceed. You can't judge your process or what you're putting out by reading reviews, because a review is also a product of what that person is, you know, a product of where that person is, that reviewer is at that time. That person is an individual. That cannot affect your creative and artistic process. And I think it can go down a very bad rabbit hole.
I was being
I'm glad.
Because
they
writers
do not serve
don't.
writers. Yeah.
No, I'm not saying. You are talking of a different thing. One is whether a writer reads their reviews and gets feedback and gets hurt or gets overjoyed. That's one level. What I was saying was that when all the novelists write, they don't write to a theory. So book critics and literary critics work on theories, and they will classify your books into certain things and find trends in them, which when you're a novelist, you're not thinking of that. When you're thinking of plot and character and language, you're not thinking of, am I going to write a postmodern, early 21st century novel?
Yeah.
You know? So that's
but I want to bring in very quickly, Anindita, especially to you, because you mentioned, you know, the reviews of your first work. Do you see a lot of gender bias in reviews? I mean, because I have faced it personally. So did, say, Arundhati Roy. When her books come out, people will comment on the shade of her lipstick or the way, what she's wearing, instead of the huge body and very impressive body of work that she's created. Now, I want to also tie this in with, you know, women writers and the space we're occupying. So, is the work of women writers, is it making society aware of women's demands? Are we providing a medium for self-expression and sort of rewriting women in history? Because I don't know how many of you all know this, but women were allowed to write only in the 6th century BC. And before that, women's voices, our stories had been marginalized so much that we were actually written out of history. But now, of course, you know, we even when women started writing, they had to adopt androgynous pseudonyms like, say, George Eliot or even J.K. Rowling or E.L. James. But now I feel like female stories are taking center stage. We are getting our place in the sun. We're finally being recognized. The awards are coming in, the bigger advances, the bigger marketing budgets. Do you think we are rewriting ourselves or writing ourselves at least into history now? And how does literary criticism, how does the gender bias then play out amidst all this?
So there are actual statistics now, right? I think The Guardian did a survey a couple of years ago where they said that women read books by both men and women, but men predominantly read books by men. And this is not party banter anymore. There are real stats. There's an article, and anyone can Google and look it up. I think Margaret Atwood spoke very strongly about this last year as well. That's why hashtag Read More Women is very important. It's needed. It's not just a passing social media fad. About gender bias while reviewing, I think the truth is most readers of fiction in India, and I think globally, are women. In general, they are the ones who discuss books more at a more intimate level and post about it on social media. That's why I say in America, the Oprah Book Club is such a big thing. In India too, I had a very low opinion of Instagram, right? Having been someone who's worked at a fashion magazine or in lifestyle publications, I thought Instagram is where you do fashion and beauty. But as a writer, I thought Twitter is where I would get traction. But I was very surprised by the number of young readers, 16-year-olds from Bhubaneswar, 23-year-olds from Patiala who do Instagram posts. Coming to what Chandrahas was talking about, those are not very developed arguments. They are not, they're not 1,000-word pieces going into nuances, but it's an engagement, and you know what, I'll take that. So I was very happy with that. So I think it's important to speak about social media when we are speaking about the changing nature of literary criticism in whatever way. Sorry, I digress. So to come to it, I did realize that most of my readers were women. Most of the book journalists now are women. Most people who work in publishing are women, largely. And since my book was about women, I was actually very keen right from the start. I didn't want to be slotted as a woman writer. I didn't want my book to be a women's book. Because why, I mean, Julian Barnes is not a men's book, Why should my book be a women's book? And I think it's at various levels, starting with the title of your book. Those pretty, cute, long titles are reserved for women's books. The pink, floral covers and women's portraits.
And
yeah, so my book is a black and white cover, and there was a to and fro for it. Why should my book cover not look like a Philip Roth book cover? So I think it starts with, with that. I knew that women would read my book and respond to the book, and I wanted to reach the 50-year-old male reader. And I was really happy with the few male reviewers who did choose to review it. There was Uttaran Dasgupta at The Wire. I think somebody at a couple of other publications, there were men who reviewed it. And I think the bar is so low. I expect so little from male readers and male critics now that I was just happy that men were reviewing my book, that they considered my book, a big girl book to review, because that doesn't always happen, Women are interviewed, with a nice photograph, and men are reviewed. So we didn't do too many interviews so that the reviews happen, yes.
Thanks for putting it across so eloquently. And I think this sort of subverting, the canonization of patriarchy is, I think, something that we're trying to do. And we're struggling with it, but I think we have made huge leaps and bounds. So thanks for sharing that. And I have to quickly, Navtej, ask you, your book, Second Thoughts, also kind of addresses this. And I want to bring it up that do you think literature has this sort of transformative or evocative power that, say, are great epics like the Mahabharata or Ramayana had, where they were actually they provided a moral, a religious, social code of conduct for society? Or do you think that Indian writing has become very formulaic? And this, all of you must chime in. I'm finding it, at least, it's because there's so much focus on hitting the bestseller list that books have become products, that we're reading not the best books, but the best-selling books. So do you think Indian writing has become too staid, it's become too formulaic, it's not pushing the envelope? Or are you satisfied with the state of affairs of the Indian novel?
Well, you can't, I'm sure everybody has a view, but my feeling here is that I don't think you can generalize about these things. And I wouldn't like to, paint all of Indian writing in one stroke. Books are transformative. Good literature is transformative. It's not a question of whether it's best-selling or not best-selling, whether it is intended to be. If you intend a novel to be, okay, I'm going to teach people a lesson with this novel, 9 times out of 10, you're going to fall on your face and fail, true literature, whether it is about love, whether it is about history, whether it is about a country's history, about a society's decadence or a society's resurgence. This is true literature if it is deeply rooted, if the author is coming out with it from a deep understanding of his subject and is creating characters with which you and I can relate to. I mean, why do you like a book? Because in a character you see yourself, or parts of a character you see yourself and you resonate. Yes, I know what the person means when she cuts her finger on the glass. I know what she felt. So ultimately, a good story can transform you. A good novel can transform part of a society. I mean, you can go back to Premchand, or you can go back to Sharat Chandra Chatterjee, or you can go back to anybody in India of somebody of that quality whose novels played such a huge role in the transformation or the portrayal of society, the portrayal of the wrongs of society. It doesn't always have to be didactic. So I think let's not confuse good literature with the bestseller list.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that good literature won't be on the bestseller list, but all bestseller lists will not have all of good literature.
Very
So
true.
I think
Yeah.
that is where the biases come in. That's where the distribution and marketing comes in, and all that. And that's all part of the game, and it's fair game. So there's nothing wrong with that. But I think my point is simply, to end up with complete confusion, is that you can't generalize on this.
Okay, so we have only time for 2 quick questions. So Chandrahas, I'm going to ask you the first one since you touched upon regional literature. The hegemonic role of English has been widely criticized, especially in the Indian literature sphere. But now I think, again, regional language books, translations, I think they're getting their sort of due now. They're, again, hitting bestseller lists, they're winning awards. We saw Tomb of Stand being longlisted for the Booker just a couple of days ago. Again, is India's plurality, is the diversity now taking center stage?
It is, I think, for 2 reasons. The last 20 years have been an amazing time, even for Indian writing in English, because, the work of Indian English writers has been seeded by amazing translation in so many languages that all of us, even if we work primarily in one language, all Indians are at least bilingual. And even in our reading now, in this book, I've written about novels in translation from 10 or 11 other Indian languages. And each one of them was, for me, a very satisfactory aesthetic experience in English. That is the main point I want to make. You can translate all you like, but until you can give the reader the experience of your hair, your goose flesh, of your hair standing on end, you're not taking the book all the way down to where it could be in the language in which it was written. And so the other half of the contract of literature is for us as readers to embrace the plenitude of the world. Because if you're going to get stuck in that place where you only read what passes in front of your eyes as a result of somebody else's investment of time or money, in a way, you are discriminating against all those writers who only write for love and passion alone. They don't know, or they don't have any sense of how to reach you, and so many others do. To take one example, one person I would like all of you to read is Manoranjan Vyapari. It's an amazing book, his autobiography, partly because he reveals in chapter 20 or 25 that he learned how to read and write when he was in jail in his 20s. Somebody who learns how to read or write the letters of the alphabet when he's in jail in his 20s, is already an adult, becomes a writer and loves writing so much that he now writes a book every year. And stories like that, it's amazing that we can live in a world where we can have writers of every kind, from a person like that to people, who like us, who, were from the very beginning, our parents made sure that every answer was right in our question paper. But in the end, literature is made by the reader. And to that extent, the responsibility is not on us. We can keep writing. It's on the people, on all your chairs and faces in here, and you've got to carry it all forward, all the way from the Ramayana down to last year's bestseller. It's
Absolutely.
It's up to you.
And my last question, I'm going to throw it open to all of you, and then we'll throw it open to the audience. And very quickly, the death knell for readers in India and for reading has been sounded on cue every year. and we hear it, but yet India has the third largest number of readers of English books. We have now 3 generations of English-speaking Indians who are growing by the minute. And there's a survey that was done by the World Cultural Score Index that said that Indians are actually reading more than the global average. We're reading around 10.5 hours a week as compared to 5.5 hours. So where does that place us? Do you think readership in India is growing or declining? What are Indians reading? And most importantly, where can people find good stories? Because I get asked this all the time that, Meghna, where do we find the good books? We don't want to be reading the best-selling books. We actually want to read the good books. So throwing this open to each and every one of you, and then we'll wrap it up.
Chandrahas's book and reviews. Meghna, if I may take 2 minutes, I want to go back to the previous question where you spoke about the changing novel form, or how books are deteriorating and if we should worry. Just to dial back a bit, what we call the novel today is, a formulation of 18th century England. There was no novel form before that. And there's a brilliant book called The Rise of the Novel for anyone interested in this subject by Ian Watt, who speaks about how the novel came about essentially to entertain women who were freed of household chores and had a lot of time. So the purpose of a novel then was entertainment. And I think Robinson Crusoe is one of the early examples of, the early English novels. At the time that Robinson Crusoe was released, it was criticized for having too much filler. People liked the action bits, but thought that the filler was not necessary. That filler writing is what we call literary fiction today, right? So the idea of what a novel is and what a good novel is has changed so much that I think for us as writers and commentators sitting on stage to worry about is the novel form changing is kind of a futile exercise. Also around then, right after Crusoe, I think the idea, novelists made great pains to actually make their novels not seem fictional. So verisimilitude was encouraged. And ask any writer today, they're going to take great pains to say that my book is not biographical. So I think the very idea of what a novel is has changed by leaps and bounds, and it's going to keep changing, and all we can do is embrace that and appreciate that, Yeah.
This was first-rate literary criticism. Very, very good indeed. Tremendous to hear.
One thought before you go on to, listening to everything, when you say my country is literature, I think literature really has no country borders. And I think that's something, since we have such a young audience predominantly, I think that's very important to remember. That, we've had the good fortune, personally, and I'm sure the others have, that, there is a country of literature which actually transcends state borders. You will find writers from different countries, writers who don't even understand each other's languages. So we don't want to hog the time, but my only suggestion, particularly to the young literature students, would be just pick up books from different countries. Pick up a book from Nigeria, pick up a book from Kenya, pick up a book from Ukraine. And I think the best way to understand a country is to get a good novel on that country. After that, you can pick up the history, politics, and other books. But the first thing, you can go back, I'll give you my personal example. When I first went to Israel, I said, all I want to read is the black box of Amos Oz. And then I will start reading all the briefs that I have. And it was the best kind of introduction that you can have, because the way a novelist will introduce, a good novelist will introduce a country to you, nobody else can. So that is just to stretch the definition of country for you.
Great. So thank you so much to our panelists. Thanks for joining us. I think art, in the ancient times was considered a ladder to, understand oneself, like a sort of Brahmananda Sahodara, which was, a womb, born of the same womb as Brahma, the creator. And I hope that art and literature takes us to that sense of self and helps us grow. So I'll throw it open to any audience questions. I think we'll have time for only 2-3. So, wow, I see a lot of raised hands. I'll ask that person in the front. Yeah, just take the mic.
Hi, thank you. So I'm essentially, professionally, I'm a software developer, but I'm also a small author and speaker, and I have done other stuff. from where I come, there are, like from the engineering background, there are very less people in my office or the people I grew up with who read books. And from my background, reading books or literature is considered something for the elitist. Like, and even here I met a lot of lit students and journalists, but not developers or or people who just like reading. So do you think there is a barrier or there's a gap? Like, is my country literature, or do you think we have not reached everyone, especially the ones who are creating technology? So that's my question.
No, you are right, and actually, it's moving to hear your experience because it's lovely to see the same thing seen from different points of view, which is itself the task of literature. There are so many barriers in India. I told you one barrier. Somebody who didn't even know how to read or write. Literacy is a barrier in India. You know, how do you get people to read poems or novels when they are struggling to read? I used to live in Kalkaji, and once in a while I used to go to get a printout done in my local cyber cafe. And there would be so many people who would come with their CVs, which they're going to send out an email to different companies, and they're all copy-paste of each other because, they couldn't understand what is the very translation of what a CV is. How do you make someone understand that? So there are all these barriers, but in literature, I firmly believe no barrier is insurmountable. There is some little sideway, gateway, or way of jumping over that barrier. And even for the sake of English literature students, there's many barriers to enjoying literature, perhaps even more than anyone else, because you have to write something about a book you don't even understand. So I've tried in the introduction to my book to lead you from a place where I was a terrible student myself. My teachers despaired that I would ever have a future in this profession. So page by page, there are little tricks that, and as Anindita said, I think Instagram has become a lovely place to connect, and it's very moving to read the combination of objective ideas about what a book was and how it related to you as a person. Even I enjoy reading everybody has a different way of relating to a book. So yes, now that you've come to JLF, if you come 2-3 more years, you will be a complete insider into
And just one line to add to that. If somebody accuses you of being elitist because you're reading, please be proud to be an elitist. Yeah, don't worry. The definition of elite is changing. And I'd be happy if somebody called me elitist simply because I write fiction. Yeah.
Sudeep has a question there.
I was very interested in the section when you were talking about literary criticism and reviewing. And Navtej, I'm glad that you brought up the example of TLS, because some of us have written for it and write for it, and how exacting the copy editors and the editors behind the review system are. The thing about India, I think as Anindita was talking, the bar is so low that you're just happy if someone's written a grammatically proper review. One of the things TLS did, and which may not be a bad thing for India to adopt, even for newspapers and magazines, are unsigned reviews, where you can be completely honest. It's vetted, of course, by the editors of the journal, and the review is printed as is. It's a thought I'm just throwing out because you can do it for free online, because there's so many good online journals that are there. And then if people are writing honestly and they don't have to tag their name to it, there might be some honesty. The reverse, of course, is if a certain kind of standard reviewer is reviewing, exactly what their line of argument is, because they've become like cut and paste reviewers as well. So these are just two things which I thought were important to suggest, perhaps.
Thanks for bringing that up, Sudeep. Yeah, any other questions? Yes. There's a guy with sunglasses. Thank you.
Hello, my question is open to all the panelists. So can you share some general good tips to do a good book review? Thank you.
We couldn't get the question.
Some general tips to write a good review? Is that what you were saying?
Yes, thank you.
Well, I think the best tip is to read good reviews, and you'll know how to write a good review. And you can't write a book review without having read 10 times the number of books that then you are reviewing, because there's nothing more unfair to a writer. I mean, I'm talking to myself, I don't know, we might differ, but there's nothing more unfair to a writer who spent 5 or 6 years of emotional, spiritual capital in producing a book, or a book of poetry or novel, to be dismissed by somebody who's just said, oh, I have 45 minutes, the editor's given me to finish a review, and dashes off something. So please, if you want to go into book reviewing, know what goes behind producing a book, and read 10 times that amount.
I would just like to add that I think placing the book in context is very important. So you can't review a book in isolation. Placing it in a literary and historical context is important. And where I think a lot of reviewers fail, which we discussed earlier, is just responding to the issues in the book. It is literature, it's fiction, so the critic must respond to, the style of the book, the language, the lyricism of the book, the form, the structure, all of that, which makes it fiction, which is different from non-fiction. I think Chandrahas should have closing thoughts on this.
Last sentence, since you asked a good question, Anindita, you actually opened the gate for that point, which is that, in writing a book review or in any essay, the hardest work is beginning. Once you get your first paragraph in and you've given yourself direction, after that you can run it all the way down the line. So a little trick is, if you can't, but often writing a good opening takes a very long time. Easy way to sidestep that problem is to make notes, and after, when you're going to start writing, find your favorite sentence in the book, write it out. You can begin with a quote from the book and then run from there. You are forced to explain why you love that sentence so much and why that sentence stands for something good in the whole book. And in explaining that, you will actually give yourself the answer to what you are trying to say in the entire review.
Great. So thank you, panelists. I'm so sorry we're out of time, but I hope the young readers enjoy the pleasure and the power of reading. So thank you, panelists.
Thank you, Mr. Chandrahas Choudhury, Anindita Ghose, Navtej Sarna, and Meghna Pant.